Hello, welcome to iOS programming course from Goli Technolologies. This is Naga Goli, the instructor, and this course is basically going to be approximately 20 sessions, and we'll be covering a lot of iOS programming for iPhone and iPad, including App Store deployments and also for the enterprise. Today's session is pretty much a basic introductory session, hence it's called the session 0, where we'll be going over the overall topics that we'll be covering in the course, and we'll be giving a little bit of introduction to the tools, the frameworks, and the whole the iOS framework. And that being said, let's quickly jump into the today's agenda, which is what is iOS. So we'll be quickly covering like what exactly is iOS and how it is different from any other operating system, Windows or typical Mac OS, so anything that is developed for the desktop versus mobile devices. And we'll also be covering a little bit about the languages that you need to know, and what kind of programming language that we would be using. Obviously, there is a lot of confusion if you're not really certain what kind of languages that people use to build iOS applications. People still coming to me and asking me, like, I hear that you could build applications using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and also using Java or something like that. So I just want to clarify, what exactly the programming languages that are associated with iOS development, and then we'll quickly jump into what kind of tools that we will be using. So obviously we will be using IDE like Xcode, and there are also a bunch of other tools that are associated with building applications which basically complement your development. So for version controlling, so basically performance optimization and all that stuff. So it's not just Xcode, and that's what we will be exploring on that slide. And also we'll be covering a little bit about this Apple developer program, what exactly it is, and uh, whether it is required for you or not when you're building iOS applications. And there are obviously a bunch of developer programs. One is for the enterprise, one is for typical the individual. So we'll quickly go through what kind of developer programs you should be using, where you would be fitting in there. And finally we'll be looking at the course schedule. We'll be looking at like all the topics, so what we'll be covering and what you would have essentially learn by end of this course. So that being said, let's go into what is iOS. A one-liner is basically iOS is the operating system that runs on iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad devices, and also on Apple TV, but that's out of the scope of this course. So we'll just concentrate to the iDevices. It's pretty much the touch devices that we're talking here: the iPhone, iPod, and iPad. And uh, iOS is basically built on 4 different layers. It's basically an extension of the Mac operating system. So you see a lot of similarities. It's just that they added the Cocoa Touch framework and added some of the functionality that is required on touch devices. So if you see this, the 4 layers from the bottom up is where you have the way they interact with the hardware, which means that the core OS is basically the one that is closest to the hardware. There's a lot of low-level coding. It's obviously the core OS is built on 4.xp as the Unix kernel. So there's a lot of networking, the sockets, the file systems, and everything that is associated with basically the low-level programming is part of the core OS, mostly built in C language, and there's absolutely there is no object orientation or any kind of abstraction over that. So the core OS is most likely something that we would never touch in the iOS programming. In fact, Apple discourages you from using APIs that would directly talk with the core OS. So this is just an overview of the core OS, but probably will not be using any of the core OS programming within our course. And then we have core services. Core services is pretty much the common service for both Mac OS X as well as iOS, and this is where you have the most quintessential the programming concepts like arrays, dictionaries, the threads and everything. All of these are basically part of the framework. So you would have like API for that. You would be using like NS thread, like collections like NS arrays, NS dictionaries, things like that. But all the stuff that basically everything that you want to interact with the core OS, the whole operating system, is basically you would be using core services. And the Apple has pretty much simplified this in the Objective-C. So I think, for example, threading is the most easiest part compared to any other threading concepts that you might have read in other programming languages. But writing the thread is a breeze. So it's like NS arrays. If you're already familiar with object-oriented programming, say Java, you should be knowing like arrays, and dictionary is pretty much a counterpart of hash map. So on and so forth. So we will be taking a deep dive into core services too, and then moving on to the next layer. It's pretty much the media layer. This layer deals with a lot of stuff that you use your device mostly for. So everything that you're talking on the phone, when you're texting, or taking a picture, or reading PDF files, or playing games, everything is because of this particular media layer. And so without the media layer, it's pretty much a dumb phone. It would be like any other phones of the previous century. So thankfully in iOS we have a lot of APIs that we could directly use and say like start recording, for say if you want to record an audio, and you can just say like stop recording, or when you have to like take a picture. So you don't have to deal a lot with the programming of at the low level. You'll be directly calling the APIs, the classes and methods that are associated with the media framework, and you can simply get along with it. And however, you could still go ahead and optimize. Say if you don't want your camera to look the way it is provided by default, there are still mechanisms to basically go ahead and change the way the camera looks. For example, if you look at the Amazon's camera, or like some of the you know check capture camera controls and some of the banking apps, they obviously add some of the text and all that stuff. So just to give a user a clear understanding of what they need to do. So all those things are possible using this media framework. And finally, you have this Cocoa Touch framework, which is obviously everything that you do on the screen which is not associated with media. For example, everything that including the screen, that the unlock, the slide that you do is pretty much based on the touch, and all the buttons, the text fields where we are entering the alert boxes where they're saying like whether you should do or something or not, all the navigation controls going away from one slide to the other, like the multiple tab bars, you have a list where you scroll. Everything is basically part of this Cocoa Touch. It's pretty much called the UI Kit framework. There are a bunch of other associated frameworks with this, and everything obviously is written in Objective-C, and it's all completely object orientation, so you don't have to worry about again writing low-level programming. We'll be basically be doing a lot of calling for with the native API that's already available, and of course iOS provides the ways to basically extend. And as you see that the buttons, the standard buttons, have a kind of a look and feel that mostly none of the apps use, so they are extended. They basically apply the themes and make it look prettier. So that is about this iOS operating system in a nutshell. So in this course we will be dealing, as I mentioned earlier, we will be dealing with everything from core services above. We probably will not be doing much of OpenGL. This is where you have the 3D games like the Temple Run or Need for Speed and all that stuff. That's obviously game programming, which is beyond the scope of this course. And Quartz 2D is we will be using the Quartz framework because we need it for some of the animations and stuff. But 2D programming is pretty much also associated to gaming, like Angry Birds is a 2D game versus Temple Run is a 3D game. So gaming is totally a different concept that which is out of the scope of this course. Apart from that, we will definitely deal with taking pictures and opening PDFs, like sending emails, recording videos and audios, and animations. Basically, how do you do like multi-touch your swipes? Like if you have ever used the LinkedIn app, you see the way that each of those little modules zoom in or zoom out, and all that stuff is basically part of the code animation that we will definitely deal with it. And of course, the Cocoa Touch, as I mentioned, all the buttons and everything that you need to basically transition from one screen to other, as well as presenting data to the user, will be part of this Cocoa Touch framework. And that being said, let's move on to the next page, which is what languages do I need to know. So basically, just to give a little bit of background, iOS supports two types of applications, native applications and web applications. As a matter of fact, the first time when iOS was released, they basically said like everybody to build applications using basically web technologies. They never exposed the native application, and that has caused a lot of backlash to iOS, and people said that they would rather develop a native rather than build web applications. So that's when they basically quickly went back and created APIs, exposed some of their private APIs, and said like, okay, now you can build native applications. So the iOS basically the iTunes App Store, everything that you download from the App Store are native applications, and web applications are pretty much what you would do to render the data on the mobile Safari. So also you could just bookmark and create an icon just on the on your home screen. However, that doesn't mean it's actually a native app. It's still a web app, and it's going to be using the mobile Safari, which is basically built on HTML technologies for CSS and JavaScript. So we are building native applications, and the only way to build native applications is to use Objective-C. There are no shortcuts. You would need a Mac, a MacBook, or an iMac, and you would need Xcode. Also, although you say like you could write programs in the Notepad, but essentially to basically make the application run from end to end, you would require Xcode, which doesn't run on Windows machine. So you are bound to have a Mac to program for iOS if you are serious about it, and if you don't own it, you rather get it. And there are ways like talking about VMware or using Hackintosh. None of them would actually live up to the standards that are required to basically build a robust iOS application. Move on to the next screen, which is like, what tools will I use? So obviously there is a lot of confusion, as I mentioned earlier, like what tools would you use? As I said, like if you go to the Google and say like can I program or build iOS applications using Eclipse? Yeah, you can. Basically a Titanium is one of them that will give you like an Eclipse plugin, and you can build it that. So I just also want to clarify that the tools that you will require to build robust iOS native applications. The ones that I've listed here, some of them actually have progression become part of Xcode. Like Xcode is the IDE, so that is provided by Apple. You can download it from the Apple Mac Store for free. Then there is something called Interface Builder, which is used to be a completely different component where you used to basically design the screens and all. Now it's part of Xcode 4.x. Prior to that, it was a separate component. And then iOS Simulator is obviously where you would be using to demo the app, or basically execute your app on the Mac itself. And then there is Instruments, which is pretty much a performance optimization tool, which will be using in one of our sessions to say like how can I optimize the apps, where do I have memory leaks. This used to have a lot of significance when there was no ARC, what is like automatic reference counting, which is like if you're a Java programmer, you would know garbage collection. That was so it was part of the memory management, which is also a topic that we would cover shortly. So iOS was actually, in iOS 5.0, Apple has introduced this ARC. Prior to that, if if you're a C programmer, you would know that you basically, whatever memory that you have allocated for the program, it is your responsibility to remove that memory. And so obviously if you're not doing it right, it would cause to memory loss and crashes and all that stuff. So that's where instruments would come handy to basically figure out what exactly is going on in the memory space. And, with iOS 5, a lot of things have been basically taken care by the iOS framework itself. Nevertheless, instruments is still a very strong tool that could help optimize the performance of your app. And then the Xcode actually has integrated support for Git or SVN for version control. So if you're building an app for yourself, you probably will think that, I'm the only programmer. I would require a version control on if I'm working on a team, but that's not entirely true. If you're working on a large project, you realize that at some point you want to roll back into a code that you're already working on, and version controlling is a very key feature in any programming, and it's more important in iOS programming because some of the screens that you build are not just like plain language, like it's not like a human readable code. So some of the storyboards or zip files beyond the comprehension. You can't say just like, okay, I just need to add this line over here. So if you make some changes over a period of time, tracing them back, just trying, it would be pretty complicated without a strong version controlling system. So we will look at that. And then there is a version editor that also comes with the MacBook or a Mac that is already installed. We'll be using how to resolve some of the merge conflicts and all. And finally, we'll be looking at this source tree, which is basically a Git IDE or a visual client for Mac OS. So this pretty much, if you're familiar with Tortoise or other version controlling tools, this would be pretty familiar. But then the Git usually has been a command line tool, and that has not been very popular. But as we see, slowly the tools that are more visual are emerging, and Source is one of the first and the most strongest visual tool for version controlling on the Mac. So before we go any further, I just want to quickly show you like how this all these components or the tools that that you'd be using for development would look like. So if I just go back, here's the Xcode. You can basically download it from the Mac store, and then it's coming up. I have a 4.22 version, and obviously 4.3.5 has recently been released. And as you can see, like this is what the tool would like, and you can pretty much say create an new Xcode project, and you can say you can connect to a repository, and then you have a lot of documentation. So let's quickly go ahead and say create a new project, and this is how it say like you can either build applications for the Mac OS X or for the iOS. Then when you go into application, you have different types of applications, and there are also plugins for PhoneGap and other stuff that you could use. So let's take a quick single view application. When you go into this, it asks for the product name. It's called session 0. So this is going to be, and then whether it is using storyboards or not, as you're saying, that the application uses automatic reference counting ARC. You can also specify whether it is being built for iPhone or iPad, and we can also say whether it would include unit tests or not. And so I'll quickly take it. It's an iPhone application, class prefix. You can ignore this right now. We'll be talking in greater detail about all this. Then it's asking you whether you want to create a local Git repository or just gonna say like where do you want to create this. And then I'm gonna say create a new folder and say training projects. Saying for now we are not creating any Git repository. So this is how we get the project created, and then we'll be going a deep these are the frameworks that I just mentioned. Like these are the basic frameworks. You need this foundation framework, the UI kit, which is mostly dealing with your touches like the buttons, scrolls, and all the core graphics is also one of the obviously most of it is being rendered as graphics, so you will need this. So you could also go ahead and add all the frameworks. These are all the frameworks that are available, and then if you don't have a framework, if you're basically using a third party, you're going to say add other, and you're going to pick a framework and add it. And as I said, like the interface builder is now integrated as part of IDE. So we'll be looking at it. So this is where you're going to directly go and say like create a button. So you're going to just grab it and put it here. So this is the interface builder. Prior to iOS 4, this used to be a separate tool, not part of IDE, where you'd basically open it up in an interface builder and do pretty much everything that you would do in post for XCode 4 development. So, and then when we try, you can say, as you can see, there are ways to basically execute. Now we just put a button over here and said hello, and then when we go ahead and run this, we are currently running it in an iPhone simulator. So this gives you kind of an idea of how it would look exactly on a device. As you see, this is the simulator that has started up, and as you can see, we just created this hello button and said like, okay, how would it look on a iOS device? So you could also specify, to run it on an iPad, obviously, and so it would give you the look and feel of an iPad. So most of your development could be done. As you see, this is an iPhone application, so when you try to open up an iPad, you have this kind of a 1x 2x version. So so if you're building an iPad application, it would be completely using the full screen. So for most of the time, the simulator would suffice to build the applications, but when you're actually trying to send it to the app store or deploy it to real devices in an enterprise, you would have to actually test them on the device rather than relying on the simulator. And also some of the features are not available on the simulator, like even though your MacBook has a camera, you can't use the MacBook camera to basically replicate the camera capture that you would do on a device. You'd still have to use a device to do that. So stuff like that would still require that you have a device and deploy the application actually on a device. We'll also talk about deploying applications on the device in one of our sessions. And then as you see that there is like the Git directly that would be created if you ask the Xcode to do so, or you could use the tool source tree, which would look something like this. So this is also available on the Mac store. It's available free. You can download, and then you can obviously say we could use the free Bitbucket, or you could also add projects from GitHub, or you can just say create a new project, and this would give you, for example, when you go ahead and open this up, it's one of my projects that I worked earlier on. So it gives you like the history of all the changes, like who has checked in the code, and then it gives you the differences over here, like what has been updated. So pretty much the standard version controlling, except for it is using your Git repository. And we will be looking at more in details about the source tree. Uh, that being said, let's jump into the next slide, which would be what is iOS developer program. Apple developer program. If you ever worked on Android applications, you probably know, like once your app is ready, all you have to do is plug in your device to the computer and just say run it on the device. Or you could just email the application that APK file and ask anybody to open the app, and they could start using the application. But unfortunately, with the iOS applications, Apple strictly controls what gets deployed into a device and how you do it. Obviously, they say it's for security reasons that you can't just take any app and deploy. But I think that if you could sell it, why give it for free? So that's the typical philosophy that Apple follows. So obviously, they make money by selling this developer program, and hence I mean, you cannot just build applications and deploy to the device. So your development is pretty much as Apple states, three phases of application development. The first one is obviously to develop. This one does not require the Apple developer program, as you saw. Like, you could just get the Xcode, which is available for free. You can start creating the applications and run it on the simulator. But when you reach a point where you want to actually deploy it to the device and test it, you would definitely need to enroll into the Apple developer program. And obviously, if you want to distribute the applications either to the enterprise or to the user community, but through the iTunes App Store, you would definitely need the provisioning that you could get only through this Apple developer program. So there's also some other resources that are available exclusively in this developer program, like the pre-release software like iOS 6, which is still in beta, which is not yet released. You get a taste of it. You can build applications using pre-release SDKs. However, you cannot deploy them to the App Store. Obviously, nobody else is having. So you can in fact even upgrade your phone or iPad to the new release. You could still have like iOS 6 running, which nobody has actually tested it. And so we'll quickly look at the website developer.apple.com. If you go there, you will see that you have iOS Developer Center, Mac development, and then Safari development. So you're gonna basically get the Apple program that is fitting to it. Each of them is like, I think, $99, like for the iOS development program. When you are actually enrolling, it's gonna ask you, like, do you want to just get for iOS, or do you want to add Mac and Safari to it? And obviously, if you're an enterprise, you need more information like the dance number, EIN number, and other stuff. So we'll be actually going through this registration process, and I will show you like how to get enrolled if you are really interested in this as part of one of our sessions. And obviously, as I mentioned, for you to run the application on the device, you would have to, once you're registered, you would have to log in into this member center, which I've already logged in. And when you go, so these are the tools that you have access to. This provisioning portal is where you will actually create the certificates that you require to deploy the application to the device, or distribute it, which means it's a production ready. And also the devices, you can't just take the application and deploy it on any device that you want. The Apple restricts that, like, per each developer license you can test the application on 100 devices, and once you register your device, you can't unregister that. So basically, if you register 100 devices, but you have to wait for an year to add or remove other devices, or you can get another developer license, of course. So and that is about this provisioning portal. And you have this iTunes Connect. This is where you will go ahead and say, like, I have a new app that I want to submit to the App Store. So you can say, like, you can say, this is where I'm going to create a new app. These are my apps that are already in the App Store. So you can say add a new app and all that stuff. This is also something that we will go through, the whole the end-to-end process of how you would actually create an IPA file, submit to the iTunes, get it actually into your App Store. Now, if you're working in an enterprise, you probably will not be using any of this. You'd be using some of the MDMs. One of the most popular one is the AirWatch. So if you see, like, so similar, it's kind of an app store for your own enterprise. So they have their own interface. You still have to use the Apple developer programs, I mean the provisioning that is provided by Apple, and then at one point you would be handing off this application to this MDM. It's called as a mobile device management, and you'll say like, hey, here is the IPA file, so deploy it to some of the devices. There are a bunch of steps. So I mean, this is again an open market, and AirWatch is probably currently the leader. This could change any moment. I'll also had experience with this AirWatch, so I will one of our sessions we will be going to like enterprise MDM, which is mobile device management, or MAM, which is mobile application management for iOS applications. So once you have registered, you have the profile and everything is set. Obviously your devices gets listed here, so that's when you can actually, so at this point, since my device is not connected, once you connect, it's going to basically automatically identify the device, and that's when you could actually go ahead and execute the program on the device. Otherwise you are still restricted to just trying either on the simulator or okay. So that is it about the Apple developer program, and that being said, we'll quickly move on to the the last slide, which is basically we'll be doing a quick recap of what we intend to teach in this course and what you could expect by end of this training, and where you can position yourself in the competitive iOS market. So we have designed this course assuming that the people who would enroll would not be pro developers. We expect a minimal knowledge of object-oriented programming, whether it is in Java, .NET, but you don't have to be an expert in it. If you have like worked on any college course, that should be good enough. We will be taking up from there, and we'll be building your skill set in object-oriented programming using Objective-C examples. So you'll not only be learning the the syntax and the functions like the loops and everything in Objective-C, but also actually how Objective-C fits into this whole object orientation paradigm. How do you create classes, how do you extend them, and how do you override methods? Everything will be part of the course. So even if you're not going to end up being an iOS programmer, this could still help for you to gain an understanding of object orientation principles. And of course, the most we will not be spending the whole time on that. It would be for maybe a couple of sessions, but then we'll quickly be jumping into building applications for iPhone and iPad. So we'll be using the XCode, and most of the development we'll be doing using the simulator, and we'll be showing the examples, and the examples will be shared on the GitHub or somewhere you can get access to, so you can play around with them. We'll be dealing with most of the data-driven application development. Like, we're not concentrating on game development, as I mentioned earlier, or animation stuff and all that. We'll be dealing with like, how do you get data from the server? So since we are concentrating on enterprise development or consumer application, so how do you get data from a server? How do you display that? How do you say fill up a form or authenticate and send it back to the server? So this kind of application development. And then of course we need to make the app prettier, so we'll be dealing with animation. So how do you do a slide? So if you swipe, or how do you say like double tap, all that stuff will be something that you would be learning as part of this course. And in every phase of this training, we will be touch basing with one or the other design patterns. We have like a business delegate, writing delegates, and then we have NS notifications, which is like the observer pattern. So when do you use one over the other? So all those things will be basically part of the program. We will instead of just telling you like this is what you could do and this is what you could do with this, we would rather take you into the details of like, okay, you could create a delegate, but this is an ideal situation where you would create a delegate, and this is what you would basically use the notification manager, and these are the scenarios that you would actually use a notification manager. So I think that is very specific to our course, that we are not only teaching you what needs to be done, but we'll be teaching you which design pattern to use when. And also, performance tuning is one of the key components when you're building large applications. I mean, if you're building a simple hello world kind of app, it doesn't make sense. But when you're working in an enterprise, you could have applications that have like a large number of data model objects, or multiple scenes. Like if you look at my one of my applications, this is I would say this is some kind of anywhere between small to medium application. It's nowhere considered a large application, but if you look at the size or the magnitude of the scenes that were created, as you can see, each flow has at least 5 to 6 and have like for somewhere around 25 to 30 scenes. So if you take a simple enterprise application which does like an authentication, does a search, and the user is able to select something and go something, clearly the size of the application grows, and obviously there will be a situation where you will run into performance issues, whether it is getting the data from the server side or just rendering the screens for the user. So that's when we'll be using these instruments. As you can see, the way to get to this instruments is basically you say like take this application and say go to this product and do a profile. It's going to profile and come up with this instruments. So you have different options. So you can say like what kind of memory allocations are happening. Do I have any memory leaks? And then you can also say like what is the CPU usage, what is the system trace, what is the activity monitoring, and all this stuff. You can say like IO activity, whether where is the network connection, how much, what is the bandwidth, all this stuff you can basically monitor and see like what are the areas that we can fine tune or troubleshoot if you find the significant issue. So, and also the graphic rendering, although we will not be dealing with any of this OpenGL analysis, we will be doing a little bit of core animation analysis. So all this are not essential for you to create an app, but it's definitely something that you could boast in your resume, and it would really help on job. And then we will also be looking at this. We'll be looking into this provisioning and distributing iOS applications, as I just mentioned in the Apple Developer Program slide, that we need some of the provisioning profiles and certificates, because Apple has a strict control of what actually gets deployed onto the device. So that being said, we'll be spending some time going over into more details about this provisioning portal, and how do you create the developer profile versus distribution profile versus ad hoc profile, which means it would be used in the enterprise or for large-scale testing. Then obviously we'll also be touching base with the AirWatch or other MDMs to see like how they fit into this overall ecosystem of app development. So, and finally we'll be actually be looking into this iOS human interface guidelines. This is something that Apple publishes. It says like you have to adhere to these guidelines for you to have your app deployed to the App Store. I mean, no matter what your requirements are, if you say like my application is going to behave differently than typical iOS application would, the chances are Apple would not approve that. So it's good to know this iOS typically called as HIGs. Once you know this HIGs, you'll have a more understanding of how this application development works. So some of this, actually the most important guideline is that you should not supposed to basically override some of the private APIs that Apple has basically designed them to be. So there's something called as model. So for example, the email, if you see any of the applications where you can send email from within the application, they have the same standard. Basically it's a model view, so you can't say like I will programmatically send an email without user interaction. I will just say, if somebody clicks a button, it's going to automatically send an email to my email address. So that is against human interface guidelines. So if you have to basically, your application has to send an email, it requires user interaction. So user has to click the A button, enter this information and say send. That's the only way for you to send an email. So things like that, which are caveats that you have to be careful about. Obviously, if you are building for the enterprise, you do not have that restriction, but it is nevertheless a good idea to keep an eye on these interface guidelines. So that being said, that is the content of the course. I hope you like my introductory session and you would actually enroll into the course. So if you would like to enroll into the course, please go to golitech.com/services, and here when you go to the training, you're gonna have a detailed overview of the course. Basically, it's we're planning to basically span it for 5 weeks, and we're currently, this is the tentative schedule that we're planning it to present it from 8:30 to 10 p.m. EST. So everybody across the country will be able to join. And then this is a detailed schedule of what we are going to teach in each week. We have like schedule like Objective-C language primer. As I said, like the Objective essential, we are going to talk for 2 days, and then we're going to XCode development environment exclusively, the IDE and how do you play with it. We're going to spend a day on it. So again, this is like a a tentative course curriculum that we probably will modify a little bit if we think like the participants who have joined request for something else, rather than say they don't want to know anything about hybrid application development or phone gap and would like to know something else. Everybody would come to a consensus. We would definitely change that and train on something else on that particular day. So if you have any questions, please email me at training@golitech.com, or you can call anytime 201-981-8201. So obviously I'll be working full-time as a developer in a different company, so I may not take your call immediately, but please leave me a voicemail and I will get back to you. So that's it, and I look forward to seeing you in my next session. Continue to have the courses starting every a month or so. So please check back with me on the by sending an email, training@golitech, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.